Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three parakim Rambam, starting with Hilchai Shvisas Yom Tov. We're going to go through the Koisedes, the header, and God willing, we will learn the first three chapters, parakim Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. So let us begin. Hilchai Shvisas Yom Tov says the Rambam Yesh Bechlalan Shteim Esrei Mitzvahs. It includes 12 mitzvahs. Sheish Mitzvahs Asei, V'Sheish Mitzvahs Lois Aseh V'Zo Prat. Aleph Lish Bois Borishin Shal Pesach, to rest. That's like an action that we're resting, and in the negative, not to do malach on the first day. Gimel lishbois b'shvi shal Pesach. Dalid shaloi lasois boy malach. Next yantiv. Hey lishbois b'chag hashavuos, and vav shaloi lasois boy malach. Zayin lishbois b'rosh hashana. Ches shaloi lasois boy malach. Tes lishbois b'rishon shal chag hasukos. Yud shaloi lasois boy malach. Note that Rambam did not mention Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was the last segment. The Rambam doesn't mention Shabbos either. So it's like Shabbos, Yom Kippur in one category, and then all of the other Yom Tovim in the other category. Yud Aleph Lishbois Bashmini, and Yud Beis Shaloi Lasois by Malacha. Bir Shvisas Yomim Elu will be Be Prakim Elu, starting with Perek Aleph with Perek Rishon. Perek Rishon is going to give you the general rules of that which is permitted, that which is Asur and Yantiv. We're going to learn something very unique, Yakir, that even though the Rambam paskins like Rab Shimon by Shabbos, B'negei Noilad, Lekula, by Yantiv, the Rambam paskins Lechumra, as we'll learn through these halachas. That's a very big difference. And in this chapter, we will also learn at the end about Yantiv Sheni Shal Golus, which you can't even call it, it's like a minig. A minig was instituted in halacha, as we will see in this chapter. This chapter has 24 halachas, beginning with halacha al. Sheishes yomim ha'elu sha'asoran ha'kosav v'asiyas malach. The 6 days that the Torah prohibits in doing work. What are the 6 days? The first and the seventh day of Pesach. The first and the 8th day of Sukkot. We're not speaking about Golus. We're speaking about Eretz Yisrael. 1 day of Chag HaShavuos. And 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. Hein hanikroim yomim toivim. And Shvisas Kulam Shaveh. In other words, all of them are equal. Guys, remember this klal, when the Torah writes Loisasa Melacha, Loisayasa Melacha, Melacha means all of the melachas. Whenever we use the word Melachas Avoida, you know what that means? It means all of the melachas aside of Eichel Nefesh. And indeed, by Yom Tov, Melachas Avoida is also anything that's needed for eating and drinking is permitted. Lachatchila, shenemar ach asher yei ochel l'chol nefesh, b'shteit hu levado yei yosel lochem. Halacha beis. Kol asher is melachas avodah v'echem mehen. Actually, resting, refraining, the act of refraining. I know it sounds like a paradox. Refraining is not an action; it's considered like an action. Harei ki mitzvas asei sharei nebe behem shabbos, which means rest. Which is not tzorech achila, like building, demolishing, weaving. Also, as it says, and furthermore, let's go if someone violated that. What's the punishment? Shabbos skila, Yom Kippur Kodesh, and Yom Tov Nish, and Yom Kippur Malchus. For example, a person was zara ubana v'sasar v'arik basra achas. Unlike on Shabbos, what would be the din in Shabbos? Right? The Torah says le'sevaro eish b'chol ma'shvoisechem. Right? The machlokes tanoim. One shita is right lelav yotzes or lachalek yotzes. Lachalek means that's where we paskin that a person who violates, even though there was only one asra. But many melachas will be chayv al kol achas va'achas. That's only by Shabbos. By Yom Tov eno loike la'achas. Because chiluk melachas l'Shabbos ve'ein chiluk melachas l'Yom Tov. These are the big rules. Halacha dalet. Kol melachas chayim eno Shabbos. Now, im also oisa b'Yom Tov. Shaloi l'tzreirach achilom. Indeed, like we mentioned until now. Now, even there are exceptions. Chutz ma'itzom reshus l'shus, carrying. By carrying a siddur. Carrying a siddur is not l'tzorech malacha. Mutter, or making a fire. And guys, I know that now, midrabanan, to kindle a fire is also on Yom Tov midrabanan. On Yom Tov we can pass a fire from a pre-existing flame, but to create a fire is also midrabanan midoiraisa. You can create a fire on Yom Tov. And for what can I create a fire? Not l'tzoydech chaychol nefesh, to warm myself up, l'mashal. L'tzoydech Yom Tov, but not for eating. And that's the klala of Beis Hillel. Shemetoich shehutra hoitzah b'Yom Tov l'tzoydech achila, hutra shalei l'tzoydech achila. And therefore, mutter b'Yom Tov lohoitzi cotton. You can carry a minor, you can carry a sefer Torah, you can carry a key. From one rishus to the other. Chein, let's go to fire. Mutter lahavit. You can kindle a fire. Afa pi she'ein tzarech achila. However, all the other malachas, guys, listen to what the Rambam is pasking. Like this, if there's a tzorech achila, what other malacha can be tzorech achila? Huge. All of them, all the the categories of the Mishnah. First category is all about baking bread. So let's go. Shchita. Now, one second. Why not harvesting? That Rambam will say in a moment. Harvesting is also lachil. So wait. Shchita, lisha, kneading, baking, the chayotze behem. However, v'chol she'ein b'hem tzorech achila. For example, weaving, writing, building, chayotze behem. That's taka awesome. However, now that we said this big headed, anything that's l'tzorech achila is mutter, lest one think, I can cut, I can harvest, I can thresh, I can winnow. So now we have the other rule, halacha hey, kol malacha she'efshel lo le'yosis me'erev Yom Tov. And if you would do it before Yom Tov, there would be no hefsid. There would be no downside. No downside doesn't mean you wouldn't have it. Wouldn't be as tasty. That's a downside. Wouldn't make a difference. Im nasas mi be'erev, guys, midoraisa no problem. Even though it's l'tzorech achila. Now, Taka, why did they make this gezerah? If you can do it, you're going to push it off for Yom Tov. And v'nimsa Yom Tov kuli hoylech b'siyas oisim melachas and v'yamana misimchas Yom Tov. V'lo yiloi pnai. The Rambam doesn't write to daven and to learn. Lechal v'lishtos. Halacha v'ov. Umitam za'atzmoi. Lo yosru ha'yitzah b'Yom Tov. So the kasha is, why is ha'yitzah different? This is the answer. Because every ha'yitzah, you can argue, is a malacha that could have done an Erev Yom Tov. So either permit them all or prohibit it all. And Taka, why don't we prohibit it all? Because that's going to completely take away Simchas Yom Tov. It's like a city without an Eruv. It's like the achrayus on a city to build an Eruv, as the place can say, for this. Because you're making people feel untrapped. The don't walk around like your hands are tied up. Since it involves asek, guys, asek doesn't mean activity. It means a prolonged activity. An activity that you're not going to be Yom Tovdik. You're not going to be involved in Simchas Yom Tov. And what will be an example of Malachas Oichel Nefesh? Or L'tzoyrech Oichel Nefesh that could have done before. Ein Choitzin, one may not harvest. Ein Doshen, you may not thresh. V'loi Zon, you may not winnow. V'loi Barin, you may not separate. V'loi Techin, you may not grind wheat. V'loi Meraktin, you may not sift flour. B'Yom Tov, why? Shkol Eid V'chayitz B'hem, Efshel HaSoisim B'Erev. V'emek HaChefsek, V'loi Chesed. But from the moment you are kneading and going forward, right, kneading already, it's fresh, less fresh. Halacha ches, avoloshen v'oifen, you can knead, you can bake, you can shech, you can cook on Yom Tov, because even though you're right, you could have done it yesterday. Yesh bakach hefsid, or at least some lack of taste. Chesed and tam. She'ein lechem cham, oy tavshel shobashal hayoim, kelechem shenefo me'emish, like something that was baked yesterday. Uchetavshel shenizbashal me'emish. V'loy basa shenishchat hayoim, kebasa shenishchat me'emish. Chen chocha yitzu be'elu. All of the other machshirei oichel nefesh, subsidiary articles involved in food preparation, that if there's a chesed nasan ve'erev, oisen oisen b'Yom Tov. What would be a great example? Grinding herbs. Grinding herbs, you're not eating the herbs. The herbs themselves are only here to make the food taste better. Even that could be done on Yom Tov. Halachates. Ein oiflin umavashlo b'Yom Tov. So now that we established you could cook and bake on Yom Tov, guys, only for Yom Tov. You don't do it for the weekday. Because now, what happens if you made it for Yom Tov and you have leftovers? Then another detail. There are certain things that either you don't have to add more work if you add more pieces of meat, or more than that, there are many things, like we'll see later, like when you bake, at least in the ovens of old, if I bake bread and the oven is full, the bread that I bake will taste better. So I'm filling up an oven because this one will taste better. Also mutter. Memala isha kadera basar, afa pisha ina tzricha l'chaticha achas. Umemala nachlim chavish samayim, afa pisha ina tzricha l'chita nechad. Here, by the way, some of this is because you're not adding extra activities. You're not adding, you're doing the same halacha. Umemala isha tchanad afa pisha ina tzricha l'chika nechad. By the bread, that Rambam writes an additional reason. Shabazman shapas meruba. When the oven is filled with bread, every individual bread bakes better. A person can fill up many jugs at the same time. They only need, chatichas. Very good, salting. Why? Because you're not adding any extra activity. And you did it. Or if you invited guests, and if you made a lot of food and they did not come, and all of the food that you cooked or baked left over, however, regarding this, we say, don't act with guile. Don't make believe as if you're preparing it for a guest. And v'im herem, hereza asur, v'afilu b'Shabbos, sha'achar Yom Tov. You can say, well, I prepared it for Shabbos. No. Halacha Yud Beis. Mish roisla behem mesukenes. Lo yishchit oisa b'Yom Tov. Let me tell you what that means. It means it's not a treifel. If you won't shech the animal, it's possible the animal will die on its own and it will become an avela. You'll have a huge money loss. Still, to shech it today, you have to know that you will at least eat a kazayas of it miboid yom. Why am I saying a kazayas salimi miboid yom? Why not cook? Because when an animal is misokenes, you have to shech it right away. Now, if this happens Yom Tov afternoon, you can do it as long as there's enough time to have some benefit from it on Yom Tov. And roasting is the quickest way to make it ready. All of this heter of tzeichel nefesh is only to cook it and bake it for a Jew, not for a non-Jew, not l'kalavim. And that's based on the pasuk kulavade yeyosei lochem. Chazal learn lochem means one thing. You Yidden. One thing can exclude many things because many things are not this one thing. Lochem v'loy l'goyim, lochem v'loy l'klavim. And therefore, because you're not doing extra malacha for the goy, all the food on Shabbos was cooked from before Shabbos. But the aim is Zamnan Moisim Yom Tov, Gzeira Shema Yarba B'Shviloi, Avolim Boy Hagoy Me'elov, Oichlim Moa Mashehem Oichlim. Why? Shekfar Hichinuhu. Very important cloud. Let me add another nuance, that if a person has the wealth of America, nowadays everything is barchava, and you don't invite over two guests. And if you're going to have a third guest, you have to know beforehand, because then you have to put 2 potatoes more into the challah. You make food for 30 people. Makes no difference whether there'll be 29 or 35. It's all the same thing. Then you can also, even before, invite a guy. But you have to know that no matter whether he'll come or not, or she'll come or not, you're not changing the quantity of food. Halacha Yudal. People think it's connected to Pesach. Yes, Pesach is a Yom Tov, but it's not just about not having a goy by the Seder. It's about you have to be mindful of the rules in order to be able to have a goy for Yom Tov to begin. Any Yom Tov, including for the Seder. Halacha Yudal. Hey Moshe Chetzer Shol Goy v'Chetzer Shol Yisrael Mutar l'shachta b'Yom Tov. No, lochem v'loy l'goy. What about an animal? Well, my half can only be eaten by shchita. The fact that the goy also now benefits from that shchita doesn't matter. It's like I can shecht an animal to have one kazayis for Yom Tov. Since she efshel le'echel memenu kazayis below shchita, I'm allowed to do it. In contrast, in Esau, a dough, if it belongs half to a goy and half to a yid, you cannot bake the whole dough because a dough you can break in half. Another rule: if you have bnei chayil soldiers, we're looking for a heter. Because if you're going to say no to these soldiers, you don't know what's going to happen. But you have to find a heter. What will be one heter? That if you would take some of the bread and give it to a child, to an infant, there would be a fine. They wouldn't be makbid. So I can argue that everything that I'm baking is for a Jewish child. Because you call pasu. Another heter. If you have an isa that you make for dogs, if the shepherds eat from dogs' food, Keminig America here, like the adults, they go down on the floor and they go into that bowl with the dog to make the dog feel comfortable, to make them feel comfortable, or if they identify as dogs, the whole Torah is America, then nefesh b'yamtiv, because it's also for human beings, for so-called halacha tezvav, hamavashal b'yamtiv l'goyim, to cook for goyim, which you were not allowed to do, or l'behema, which you're not allowed to do, or l'nech l'chayil, even though you were not allowed to do it, ain't no loika. Why not? Even though, because you can say, she'ilu boy loy archim, hoy loy oisatav shroy lohem. You made food for a behema. Guests would come, you can give it to them. I don't know. And furthermore, also l'nafshe v'hoyse b'chal, it's not a problem. Mutar lahachal menu l'goyim l'behema. Allah chetazai. Now, let's go. The chitza v'sicha are considered eating and drinking. They are allowed to be done on Yom Tov. Guys, these are big halachas. But let's wait until the end of this halach. Because it says, Asher ya'achal l'chol nefesh. L'chol nefesh means, if you remember by Yom Kippur, we said nefesh means eating and drinking, but it actually means more. What other activities connect the body and the soul? Sicha. Sicha b'chlal shesiya. Sicha then, Keva knows about the anointing with oil. The ways they used to tip a waiter in the good old days was that you would push it. Makes a lot of sense. The extra oil you would put on their head, that will be the tip. Because it's Soirech Haguf. And that goes to bathing. And if that's the case, you can warm up hot water on Yom Tiv. But there's one thing. If you remember in Ilchos Shabbos that the Chachamim made a gzeira because of the ballonim that would warm up water on Shabbos. So when they made a takana not to bathe, I'm not talking about us looking at a bath, they made a takana not to bathe on Shabbos and on Yom. So you can take a wash body parts. Avo kol gufay asu. And because of the Gezeiras Merchetz, guys, we learned this in the Shabbos Perek Chav. These are dinim that we cannot change. Bathing in hot water on Shabbos. Now, what are you allowed that Rambam writes? Washing Panav Yadav Raglav. What am I getting at? What about taking a shower? Not only Panav Yadav Raglav, your whole body. So there's a big difference if you wash your body Eiver, or whether you wash your body altogether. Let's put it. Then Rachazam Kol Gover Yantiv Shalei Gozru Al Adavar Zeh Ela B'Shabbos Bilvad. Okay. Anyway, that Amar writes that on Yom Tiv you can only wash your body Eiver, but not Kol Gufay B'Yachad. Just Lahoyer Stam. There's so much to talk about. B'Kitzur, there's some showers like the one in my house. You never wash your whole guf ba'asachas. Get under this, get under that. Some people have these showers. What are they called? I don't have the name. Big difference. Halacha. But what about that? So just to know, Benegea bathing, another nukuda, you have the oisius, that anything that's not shavel l'chol nefesh, the chachamim did not allow. And that also has to do with rechitza. Rechitza in the times of Chazal was not shavel l'chol nefesh because people would bathe once a week if they would do that. So don't bathe on Yom Tov. Many of the places can now say the world changed. People bathe every day. People shower every day. And the more it becomes something that's shavel l'chol nefesh, the more we should be matir. And mitzat sheni, the flip side, is that smoking. That when I grew up in the 80s, everyone was still smoking. And everyone smoked on Yom Tov. Okay, you don't kindle a fire midrabanan, but from a pre-existing flame, everyone would smoke. You can't put the cigarette out. Many places can say, since nowadays it's not shavel l'chol nefesh, I'm not talking about marijuana, I'm talking about cigarettes. That's not shavel l'chol nefesh. And many people say you can't smoke anymore. Anyways, it's the shavel l'chol nefesh is a big role over here, and that can be matir, something that's asur, and it can be asur, something that's mutter, but let's leave it at that. We don't say this by something that's not shavel l'chol nefesh. I think the Gemara in Beitza was about mugmar, was about burning the perfume on Yom Tov under the clothing. It wasn't shavel l'chol nefesh. Only Yashirim did something like that. I think that was the source. But that's just to be aware of these words. Halacha Yudzai. If you remember in Hilchos Shabbos, so you had the Lamatas Malachas, all of us undertold this, and then you had there's two reasons: either it's doimel malacha, or it might lead you to a malacha. Generally, that becomes a shvus. Then we learned from Yeshayahu, then we had muksa. So he said like this: anything that's asur on Shabbos. Now we're going from Midrabanan. Whether it's because it's doimel malacha or maybe l'dei malacha. These are the two main reasons for shvus. Bein mum shvus, the Rambam puts it, or shvus. Obviously, yeah, it's another nuance. Hareyu asur b'yantiv. Elam kain hoy by tzarech achil v'chayetzavo. Oy devarim sheim mutar meyamtev. As we'll learn soon, was our other exceptions. Chol she'asal tatal b'Shabbos because of muksa. Asal tatal b'yamtev. Elo tzarech achil v'chayetzavo. Chol she'mutar b'Shabbos. You know, we don't say, oh, that kid. The toich shehut l'tzarech is only said by carrying and by food, direct food. That's what the Rambam said. The Rambam doesn't pass like this all across the board because you can say by tiltul. Why is there Isra of Muksa? Muksa l'tzoyrech oichel nefesh is mutter. So say all Muksa is mutter. We don't say that. It has to be direct. Kol shemutter b'Shabbos, that mutter b'Yontif. However, here we go. There is one thing in which Yontif is more chamor. Guys, this is amazing. The yesh b'Yontif ma she'ein b'Shabbos, which is Isur Muksa. Now let me tell you what the words Isur Muksa means. Isur Muksa means, and we spoke this out when we learned the sugyas in Hilchos Shabbos. Is pshat muksa that if you set it out of your mind to be used, then you can't. Then it's muksa, or adarabah, you have to set it for it to be used. It has to be mukhan for you to be allowed to use it. And if you didn't specifically designate it to be used on Yom Tov, then it's going to be muksa. The latter is how we understand it for Yom Tov, not for Shabbos. In other words, for Shabbos, as long as you did not resolve not to use it, you resolve not to use it like it's something that's a davar chalach le'isur, chesron kiss. You don't want anyone to use it. That's like a muksa on Shabbos. But if you didn't take it away from it being used, it's okay. For Yom Tov, it has to be designated to be used. And if not, it's muksa. And that will include noilad, because noilad, it only came into the world on Yom Tov. That means it wasn't set to be used. It wasn't here to be set to be used. Shamuksa asa b'Yom Tov v'mutar b'Shabbos. Now, what's the logic behind it? Shabbos is only Yisur Malchus. That's Yisur Skila. That's exactly the logic. Since Yom Tov is Kal Shabbos, and not only is it a lesser punishment, but you have all these leniencies. Anything that's l'tzoyrech oichel nefesh, anything, shkita, and then when it comes to carrying and to kindling a fire, we say even l'tzoyrech putra shaloi l'tzoyrech. So asru boy hamuksa shamayovoy l'zalzal boy. Now let's give examples of this type of category of muksa that b'Shabbos muted b'Yom Tov aser. Ketzad tarnagoyles, a hen, that you own it for it to lay eggs. In other words, not designated to be eaten. And by the way, on Yom Tov you can shech. So anything that's designated for food won't be muksa. But this was dafka. You know, you don't want it to be eaten. It's your egg factory. Not to be eaten, to plow. Or v'yoyne shoyver, which yoyne shoyver, it's even more. It's not that you said you're not going to. You didn't designate it. These birds come, the birds go. So it wasn't dafka muchan to be used. Right, it's made to be. Now, what did we learn in Hilchos Shabbos and Biklal? That even though normally anything that's designated for business is muktzah for Shabbos, but not food. The Rambam paskins that food, even if you had a bundle of food that you designated to sell, you can change your mind on Shabbos, not for Yom Tov. Kol eilev chayizma muktzah for also lechem Yom Tov. Ad sheyachin oisum avoid yoyim. You have to designate them and think you're going to eat them. But by Shabbos, no. Hakel muchan etzel Shabbos v'nachana. It's not that there's no muksa for Shabbos. Of course not, guys. We had all these chapters. It means that by Shabbos, let's say we pass like Rab Shimon, by Yom Tov it's more like Rabbi Yehuda, something like that. Shem shamuksa asa Yom Tov. Similarly, kach leilo daser. Since it just came into being, same thing. If it just came into being, it wasn't muchan. And we'll get more about that. Many consequences. Halacha 90. Choil mechen l'Shabbos, choil mechen l'Yom Tov. But ein Yom Tov meichen l'Shabbos. V'lo Shabbos mechin l'Yom Tov. And therefore, let's go. Beitza shenolda b'Yom Tov. Achar Shabbos asuram. Now, even if you have a tarnagoylis hoy medes la'achila, ho yulumi emesh nigmara ha-beitza. Verstehst? For you to eat the egg has to be edible. If the egg was born on Yom Tov after Shabbos, gavaldik. That's the mitzias. It was readied yesterday. So when did it become food? On Shabbos. So Nimsa Shabbos, which is not allowed. And now that we can't eat an egg that was born on Yom Tov after Shabbos, because whenever the egg comes out, it was ready a day prior. Similarly, a beitza that's born on Shabbos, asura. On Shabbos, we're not so makbid by noilid, because if it came out on Shabbos, that means it was ready on Friday. If Yom Tov will be on Friday, then what are you doing? Then you're having Yom Tov being meichen l'Shabbos. Halacha chav. Shem she'asala achla. Once a food item cannot be eaten, don't think the problem is only eating it. Now asala taltala. And worse, such a thing is only asur to eat and to be metaltal because of Shabbos, because of Yom Tov, which means it's a davar sheyesh le'matirin. So therefore, if it gets mixed even be'elef kol ha'masura she'yilach yitru ha'koil, and because of this klal that called davar sheyesh le'matirin, afilu ba'alfei alofim ein abatel. Next case, ha'shechet ha'negolos b'Yom Tov, beitzim gumurais. Here you can also argue if what happens if Yom Tov will be after Shabbos, and in the hen you find, which means it was ready a day prior. It's already something that's not normal, not usual. Because she'ein zadavar matzei tamid, and now we say v'davar she'ein matzei elekeri loy gaz ruba halacha chafal. Zeh shano emrim b'chutz la'aretz chol Yom Tov me'elu shnei hayamim min leku. The Yom Tov sheni medivrei seifrimu umedvarim shenetzchatshu begalus ve'ein oisem b'nei Yisrael shnei hayamim ela b'Rosh Hashanah b'uvad. That's klal number one. Now, why is Rosh Hashanah different? Says that Rambam will learn about this soon. Which will be in this sefer of Zmanim, this word Iker Minik. So, first of all, that's a fact. Second, the Yom Tov is a Minik, only Begolus Rosh Hashanah, even in the Holy Land. Halacha Chavez. Yom Tov Sheni. Afa Pishu Medivrei Seifrim. Don't treat it leniently. Kol She'asa B'Rishon, Asa B'Sheni. There's one exception. We'll see about Kvura, Mace. Kol Amachal Yom Tov Sheni Yafil Rosh Hashanah. Bein Medavar Shum Mishum Shvus. Bein Memalacha. Bein Shes Chutz L'Tchum. Makanesim Makas Mardas. Or if he's not a Talmud Chacham, we're going to put him into a Chedim. You hesitate to put Talmud Chacham in a Chedim. Oy Menadin Oisim Im Lo Yemet Talmid. Shem Shorishon Asur Behesved Ubetimes V'Chai V'Simcha Kacha Sheni. The only difference ve'ein hefresh, ve'ein b'neim hefresh between the first day Yom Tov and the second day Yom Tov is only the inyan ameis. What do we mean by inyan ameis? Ketzad ameis b'Yom Tov rishon. Guys, by the letter of the law, theoretically, they had no refrigeration. They would bury them on Yom Tov rishon through goyim. Yisasku b'kivrosei hagoyim u'b'Yom Tov sheni yidin. Everything Yisasku by Yisrael. In other words, as far as a mace is concerned, there is no Yom Tov Sheni. You know what it means? Called not just the burial. What happens if they didn't build a beer? They can make the mito. They can sow the tachrichin. They can cut. They can harvest the psamim. Because these are the words. Yom Tov Sheni l'gaba hameis k'choyel u'chasher. And even on Yom Tov, afilu shnei yomim shel Rosh Hashanah. And now the final halach in this chapter, halacha chav daled. These 2 days of Yom Tov, which we call of Goliyos, are not considered one continuum, but they are considered Shtei Kedushois. Even though the Rambam just said in Halacha Chav Beis that Mamish, whatever is Asad on one is Asad on the other. I know, but still, as the Rambam will explain in this final Halacha, in this chapter, it's considered there's 2 Kedushas. And they're not like one day. So I'll give you an example, something that we just learned in this chapter. If something is Muksa B'Yom Rishon, or if something is Noilad B'Rishon, because Yom Tov can be Meichen L'Yom Tov. You understand? It's Ein Yom Tov Meichen L'Shabbos. Ein Yom Tov Meichen L'Choil. For example, a Beitza that was born on the first day of Yom Tov can be eaten on the second day. Another example, a chai v'oif that were only trapped on the first day of Yom Tov. Trapped then means they weren't muchand prior. That Rambam says, even though it's food, I can shech on Yom Tov. But by Yom Tov, we say that there's a muktzah prohibition, more than Shabbos. But yes, they can be eaten on the second day. Shouldn't have happened, but it happened, right? So then Yachal B'Sheni. Another leniency. Now we're going a little bit off. You are allowed to put this type of choil in the eye, even though there isn't any choili. Guys, we're going into something a little bit different. When someone has an irritation in the eye with no danger, for Yom Tov Sheni we can be lenient, not for Yom Tov Rishon. That's another leniency. So before that, Rambam says Elul Meis. Now we're learning another nuance. All of the above. That's only b'shnei Yom Tovim Shel Galuyos. Avol Shnei Yom Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah. The meaning of kedusha achas means that they're like one day. Aside of the inyan of a mace. Aside, in other words, when it comes to a mace, guys, that if someone passes away, they can be buried by a yid on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But aside of that, it's like one day. So if something is noilad b'yom tov rishon of Rosh Hashanah, because of the din of noilad and Yom Tov, it cannot be eaten on the first day. But derech mamela, it cannot be eaten on the second day. Aval beitza shenolda b'rishon Rosh Hashanah asura b'sheni v'chein chocha yoytze b'zeh. Says the Rambam Shabbos hasemucha l'Yom Tov. The nolda beitza be'echad mehem asura b'sheni. V'chein kol kayoytze b'beitza v'afilin l'Yom Tov sheni l'teyachol b'Shabbos hasemucha loy, because ein Yom Tov mechen l'Shabbos. Beautiful, beautiful. This is the basic klalim of Isurei Shabbos. And now we mentioned how Yom Tov has one chumrah more than Shabbos. And that's what the Rambam called as Isur Muksa. And like we mentioned, it's not that Muksa is permitted on Shabbos, God forbid. We have chapters in the Rambam. But we take a much more lenient approach. On Yom Tov, we're much more chamur. Something has to be mukhan to be used. Noilid is asur on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. So now the next chapter is going to speak a lot about muksa. The unique muksa of Yom Tov Perek Sheni has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha al. We learned in the previous chapter also about a beitza shenolda b'Yom Tov in the context, Yakir, of an egg that's going to be eaten as an egg. This chapter is beginning with something different, not to be confused. An egg, shenoilda, means the egg that you have in your fridge. You want to make a scrambled egg. Efroyach shenoilad, it's a whole different thing. It's similar dinim, but just not to be confused. Froyach means that there was a fertilized egg. And efroyach means it hatched on Yom Tov. What's the issue? Can you shecht it to eat it? That's a whole different category. It's a different din. Halachal. Efroyach shenoilad b'Yom Tov. A chicklet hatched on Yom Tov. Awesome. Because it's muksa, like we said. Hold on. Why is it muksa? Of course, I'll tell you why it's muksa. Because if you have an animal that's designated to be eaten, not muksa on Yom Tov, you're shacht on Yom Tov. This, did you know when the chick is going to hatch? You didn't. You didn't know. You didn't know. That's it. We're going to learn also later. If you have yoin shoivach, the Rambam says that the pigeons in the shoivach are called muksa. You have to designate them, but you have to know which ones you designated. You cannot just say whichever ones. They're also, you don't have to pick it up. We're going to learn details about it. I think that it's just a machshava, but it has to be that one and that one. And then if you don't know if those are the same ones, you don't know whether it's going to hatch. The egel shenol b'Yom Tov, that's already different. Here, I don't care if you didn't know. I don't care if you didn't know, because when the egel was in the mother's womb, what's the whole day of Tekua? Remember, if you shech the mother, you can eat what's in it. The mother was designated for shechita, then that egel was designated. Because it's muchan agav imoy. How beautiful is it? And there, in other words, since the ilu shachad imoy, while it had the egel in it, even though it was not born, that's why there's no issue. Yeah. No, you cannot shech the mother and the child on the same day. But if you shech a mother who's pregnant with a baby, then there's no problem. Okay, halacha beis. Yeah, and when the Rambam is saying that the egel is born on Yom Tov, you can shecht it. So then you cannot shecht the mother. Halacha beis. Right, that's the whole scene over there. No, it's when do we say that animals were designated to be shechted? So even animals that spend the whole day outside the tchum, Shiva Bachar outside the yeshiva, but at least he goes to sleep in the dormitory. They're called Muchanim because he comes back every night. That's called midbariyos. Remember that whole machlokes. How do you define it? Baisois midbariyos. Avol sheroyos v'lonis chutz l'tchum. If they don't only pasture outside the tchum, but they even sleep there, and every now and then they come home. Imbo b'yamtiv ein shechten oison. That's called muksa. Meaning ve'ein das anshei ha'ir aleim. Like we spoke on in the last chapter, that for Shabbos, the pshat is that only if you decided not to use it on Shabbos, then it becomes muksa. If you were neutral, you didn't make a decision. If it's something, many times you can move it, at least if not chatzmai. But by Yom Tov, no, it's much more. It needed to be set to be used on Yom Tov. If you weren't meichen, if it's not min hamuchan, it becomes muks. Halachigim. Now, kachim you can't use for anything. But what happens if it gets blemished? Then you can be paid it, right? Now, based on that, we're building a building. How can you even look a mumcha, someone who is an expert, to say it has a mum? Because what's going to happen if the chacham is going to say that it's mutter? Maybe someone erroneously was shachtan on yontiv, so therefore you don't even look at it. But you know what you could do? You could look at the mum out of yontiv, and even yakid, even though the chacham didn't paskin yet, it's good enough because a guy already knew this animal. If the chacham is going to come with the psak din that it's a mum, then I'll be allowed to shacht it. Now, similar in this category is a Bukhar. Bukhar is something that's Kaddish Merachem. That means you were not Magdish it, but there also, if it has a blemish, then it becomes whole and property of the Kohen. So Bukhar Shenoilad Umumay Imay Hareza Muchan. Why? Because we already learned in the beginning of this chapter that a baby in the womb of the mother is Muchan Agavimay. Right? And don't forget that the whole din of Bukhar is only when it's born. That means when it was in the mother's womb, it was Muchan. If it came out already with the womb, it never lost its Hachanah. I lost my place. Yeah, that's some daf tshuva machenim inot. Yet, you don't make a bedika. No, as a kid, you don't make a bedika because of the cloud. You're not boydek kachim. Now, if you made a bedika, that's the chid. And if you did, and the guy wrongfully looked at it, buy other kachim. If the chacham made a mistake and he looked at it on Yontiv and he says it's a mum, you cannot shecht and eat it. Here you could. That's the nafkamin. Any animal that you cannot eat, which is what we're saying, even though if it has a mum now, a normal b'char that was born, if you can't eat it, then it's smuksa. If it's smuksa, you can't move it. We had this in Shabbos. So what do you do? It's har balachayim. So ideally, you give food into it. Here you go, so you can argue if I can't shech both, maybe I should not be able to take out neither. Sar balachayim, be marim, take out both, which means take out one, say I'm eating this, not the other one. Then say, no, I'm not eating this, I'm eating the other one. Take out the other one. And then once both are out, then you can go back to say I'm going to shech anyone I want. Why were they allowed to do this type of ha'arama? This mishum tzar balachayim itiru laharim. Behem as chulin shenoflim in agag. And what did we learn, guys? You have to remember hilcha shchita. We're going to learn in hilcha shchita all of these dinim that what if the animal could stand up, if the animal cannot stand up. If you remember, or if the animal could walk or not walk. If the animal is unable to walk, then you can take a shechted. But then you have to make a bedika inside the inner organs. That's the case. And it needs to have shchita bedika. Maybe you're going to discover that it became a treifa. So what? Maybe you'll be allowed to eat it. And that justifies it not being muks and you can shech. Now, if they find it to be treifa yakir, then it becomes muks. Halacha. Avazim ducks, v'tanagoyim chickens, v'yonim and doves, shumabayis. If they are in your house, they're considered muchanim. Zimun, right? Muchan. But doves that live in the dove cote, or if they live in your loft, in other words, they come and go. They're free birds. They're not considered muchan. or tziparim shekinenu, other types of birds that they made a nest, batapichin, in different types of basins or in type of your buildings. No, they're muksa. That's it. The Rambam says you only have to say elu ve'elu ani noit, but you don't even have to shake it. That was all machlokes tanoim. You don't have to shake it. You can say words. Halachavav. Ziman shchaydim alovanim, and you only find shchaydim amakam lovan. Now, guys, what's the issue? The issue is you can say that if you designated that kid whites and blacks, and now they're only blacks. You know what I'm afraid? I'm afraid that all of the birds that were there flew away. All of these are new birds. I can't have any of them. In other words, anytime you have a suffix muchan, we're machmer, asur. Another din, if you designated two birds and you find three, we don't say one came. You know, we say all three. The two that you designated went away. All of these three are new. Hakolasa. But the opposite direction, if you were making three birds in this little hole in the duff coat, and you come back next morning, there's only two. Then we say that the two that remained were the two. Mutarim. If you designated them while they were inside the cane, inside the nest, and you find them right in front of the nest, and there's no other nest, Elohim, and these are not birds that can fly, they can only hop around, then we again are good. In another corner, within 50 amma, which is another big klal about the 50 amma, that they go out 50 amma, still it's mutter. Why? Because the birds that can only hop, they only hop in a straight line. And therefore, if they are straight in front of this nest, even though there's another nest in the angle, they did not come from that one. It's not a suffix. If there would have been a suffix, we would be machmer. It's not a suffix. Halacha zayin. Dagim should be bottom gedolim, fish in large ponds. You know what it means, a fish in a large pond? Even though it's in the large pond, if I want to fish, I have to go fishing. It means they're not trapped yet. And what did we learn? We learned, what did we learn, Yakir? That trapping, I know it's la'oichel nefesh, but you know what? I could have trapped it before. I couldn't have shechted it before. I couldn't have taken the fish out of the water. I wanted to be fresher, but I could have done it before Yom Tov. That's why you can't do this on Yom Tov. So even though they are in a large pan, or chayin oif shebibi baran gedolim that are in large pens or enclosures, if you still have to trap it, what question that the Balabayas says to his chevra, guys, bring me that trap for me to get it. It means he has to do another act of trapping. Then it's muktzah, even though they were in the large pen. The ein sad the noisem yamtiv, and the im sad lo yeyachlu. The ein tzarach chleimer. If it's already in a place where you don't have to trap it again, like in one jump, you got it. You don't need it trapped again. So if you have a wild animal that established a home in your orchard, which is near the city, which means people saw those animals. People saw the animal. That's number one. Because since it's near the city, people saw it. Everyone had in mind before Yom Tov, I'm taking that tomorrow. All these types of traps, snares, that if the hunter spread them out from Erev Yom Tov, what's the shaila? And 1 second, when they go into that net, they're trapped. What's the question, Yakir? I'm going to wake up Yom Tov morning and there's going to be an animal in it. I don't know when did the animal go in it. If the animal would have been in it from before Yom Tov, I can argue it's muchan, even though I didn't meet it, but it's in my trap. But maybe it only got trapped today. That's the issue. Now, if a person makes a dam in the water conduit, you know why would they make a dam? Because when you stop a body of water from flowing, you know what happens? The fish get stuck in there. And this is not in a biber gadol. The fish in these little dams, Yakir, you can chop with your hand. That's what we say. If you stop the dam, it's not like a trap in the wild, and who knows, it might take another 12 hours for an animal to go in. In these ponds of water, the fish filled up right away. The animal has to be there before Yom Tov. Because I need to have the animal mucha, not the trap. If the trap was empty and the animal only came in there last night, during Yom Tov, that animal was never mucha. Halacha 9. You have a building. Produce that was designated for use. That's important, right? Because for Shabbos, we said, even if Peiros Yakir were designated for Schoira, on Shabbos is not Muksa. On Yom Tov, we learned in the last chapter that anything designated for Schoira is Muksa. These fruits, these produce was designated to be eaten. But 1 second, Yakir. It became you couldn't get there. You couldn't get there, the food was designated to be eaten. But the house was closed in a way that you can't get to it. The only way you can get to it is by demolishing the house. Demolishing the house you can't do on Yom Tov. But now, by itself, the wall collapsed. That's the question. Do we look at it as muksa, because you could not have gotten to it? Or do we say, since this food was inherently designated for eating, there was an inyan chitzoni that was not allowing you to get there, and that thing went away? We say the latter. We're making. Noitel mimakem abchas. Because the food was muchan, it was muchanim to be eaten. Huh? Ha'oimed ala muksa be'erev yontif v'shana shavis. What's the word over here? You're surveying fruit. Muksa, guys, means fruit that was said yakir to be dried prior to yontif. That's good. Shekol ha'peiros hefker. Sarech sheyirsham. In other words, unlike by the birds, where hazmana is only needed bepeh, food that's on the Shemitah year, that the fruit is hefker, and it's out there, you have to make it a shima on it. You have to do a physical thing on it. A guy brings a gift of fruit. What's my issue, Yakir? You know what issue is? Maybe the guy harvested that food on Yom Tov. Now he has no halachic namanus to ask him. Yeah, in other words, it's possible that the guy actually harvested it on Yom Tov. That's a problem. Or if he brings a chayi oif as a dogim, the guy comes to you and he brings you a deer. Just imagine that picture. But it's something that he could have trapped on Yom Tov, that's a problem. And we don't say ask him. He has no nemanus. And not only Adla Erev, but the Yom Tov b'chtei sheyeh yasur. That's maybe different. Maybe different. I don't think so by a tshuva. Anyways, let's go back. Afilu hadas. Doesn't matter if it's a deer or it's a myrtle. You can't even smell it until the erev. And not only that, and wait another 10 seconds, the time that it takes to cut it off. But that's only because it's possible that this was taken on Shabbos, and therefore it is muksa. But this for sure was already muchan before Yom Tov. It's old. You look at the myrtle, like looking at a rose, you understand, you bought for your wife last week, it comes a point where, it was not harvested today. You know that it was machacha sheme'esmol neka roy nitzad. So there can be another issue. Did he bring it beyond the tchum? So maybe you're metechat tchum muter. The habab shul yisrael zeh mechutz l'tchum, rather than even something that came beyond the tchum. If it came for one Jew, for the uven, Shimon can have it right away. Let's go back. A lot about firewood. People needed firewood. Today you have a gas, both for cooking and for eating. So I guess wood, my friends, that fell off the tree on Yom Tov, that's what we're learning. Then I know it's when it was on the tree, you're not allowed to chop it off the tree on Yom Tov, so it's not muchan, it's muksa. Asalasika. That's called moila. It came into the being. Before it was a tree, now it's firewood. But if it fell into the oven, do you have to go take it out? No, you don't have to take it out. You just have to be mavatal it. Another case. Piles of straw, and storage, piles of wood, brand new piles. Because if they were not specifically designated, tell you something, my friends. You know what's unique about Aremas HaTev and V'Oitza Shel Eitzim? Remember, because many people give it to animals. We're saying that why is it muksa? Because prior to Yom Tov, it wasn't yet designated to be firewood because there was another usage of it. And therefore, if in this tevin there is a thorn, so you would not give it to animals. That means the only function of this is fuel. Then it's already muchad. Okay, halacha yudbeis. Ein mevaken eitzim mitzaver shel kodesh. Forbidden to chop wood. Speaking about chop wood, yakir, that has been designated for construction. But on Yom Tov, I want to chop off a piece. You can't do that. That's the whole word. Because if you're making a new piece that came into the world now, that's called noilat. V'chen kelim shenishberu b'Yom Tov. But you know what? You know what's amazing? If you have a keli, I have a wooden cup. Now the wooden cup was not designated to be fuel, but since it was not muktzah, I can change its designation on Yom Tov for fuel. Complete kelim. Avol mesikin b'kelim shleimim. Or if kelim broke from before Yom Tov, that means I already knew I'm going to use it for fuel. Similarly, a goyim mushkedim that you ate from the end of Yom Tov. Now you have the shells. The shells are great fuel. So then masikim can complain about Yom Tov because it's automatic. In other words, when it comes to these items, it's considered even for Yom Tov, we're more machmir, automatically designated for fuel. But if you ate them on Yom Tov, so if you ate them on Yom Tov, how will we view the shells, Yakir? The Rambam says noilad. So then masikim b'klipein. Happens to be that Rambam says there are other opinions that say tum faket. The yesh nuschoy sheyesh behem, the opposite. That if you ate them ahead of Yom Tov, ein masikim b'klipein. Why? Because one second. Shemachol ba'erev ein masikim b'klipein. Shrei huksu. Because they were mochalim agavoich. In other words, if when Yom Tov came in, look how the irony. If when Yom Tov came in, there were already shells. I think he's saying they're not automatically designated as fuel. I think it means, Yakir, since it's oichel, even though you ate them, until you designated them to be fuel, I think that's what it means. It's still going to be awesome. Faket, if you ate it on Yom Tov, since before you ate it, it was oichel. Oichel is not muksa. It's like a keli. He says that a shleiman, a keli shalom can be burnt for fuel. Ayat wasn't designated for fuel, but it's not muksa. Then it's okay. Anyway, the Rambam, that's the first nusach. Then it's okay. No. Halacha Yud Gimel. On Yom Tov, it's too late. Because when it's in the klipa, it's not called klipa. Before you ate it, it's not klipa, it's oichel. The klipa only came into the world on Yom Tov. Right. That noilad is awesome. Let's go back. Halacha Yud Gimel. Koitz rotoi. If you have a freshly cut, thorny branch, it's muktzah. Why? Because it's not fit to be, you don't put it in the fireplace. And since you can't do it for that, also loyla soy to make it into a shapud, into a spit, litzleis by basa v'chein cholcha yoytze b'zeh. Halacha yudalid noitel eitzam asmachol dafni sukkah masikam behem. If you have wood that's placed next to the walls of a hut, it doesn't only mean a sukkah yom. It's not part of the building. Part of the building is going to be muktzah. If you took it apart, it was placed next to it. You understand? You could use it for fuel. Look at the chiddush. Even if you gather them in the field, you know why? Because fuel, potential fuel, that's gathered in the field, Yakir, in the field, if it's in the field, it wasn't meant to be used as fuel. The question is, can you kindle it in the field? You could do it in the field. Next. If you have other twigs that were gathered and stored in a private domain, that you could do. Even if it's in an area that was surrounded, it was designated for fuel. Now, 1 second. What happens if it was designated in an area that you can't get in? That's already worse. Here, the Rambam is saying that area has to have a pesachas. So pesachas means, guys, it has to have a gate, it has to have a lock, it has to be shaykh to get to it. And it has to be b'tech tchum Shabbos. Stam lohoid that Rambam wrote before about food. That's not fuel. By food, we said, halachet tes, that even though it wasn't a building that had no gate and lock, if on Shabbos the wall fell, you could take. By fuel, it has to have a poisachas. The im chas mekolechad v'charemutz. Halacha tezva. Ali konim ali gefanim. Leaves are reeds, leaves of vines. Even though they are mechunasim, they're collected by carpet. Carpet is any type of enclosure. It's not good enough. Why is it not good enough? Yakid, because it's very light. And anything that can be blown by the wind, you can't say, it was designated for fuel. Yuda Balabas knew probably it won't be here tomorrow morning. It could be dispersed. There's a certain amount of likelihood, enough to say, and there are asur. But therefore, if you put a keli covered net of yontiv, if you took an action which you knew you were confident, can it be blown away? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Then already I'm mukhan. Allah tazayim. Look how much about fuel was very practical. Everyone needed this. Cipher food, cipher heating. Allah tazayim. The hema shemesa be yontiv. Im hoisem sukaris med of yontiv. Means you knew it's going to die, so it's considered already designated for animal food, and therefore you can cut it up like klavim. The im lav, you didn't know it's going to die on yontiv. So hoyel v'loy hoisa dato leha. And similarly, behemas kachum shemesa or truma that's tamei lo yizizena mimikayma. All muksa. Halachat yazayt dogim v'oifesh chayo shem muksa. Once they are muksa, listen to this now. Ein mashkenoisim b'yamtiv, and you can't give them a zoynes because you might end up taking it. You know what we're talking about? We're talking even about animals that you're mechuyev to feed. Even animals that you're mechuyev to feed, you cannot feed directly. Now there's dinim shulchan aruch. You can place the food far away for them. That you could do. They're animals. First days. What animals can you feed on Yom Tov? Your foods, and which other animal? A dog. Because aim is you could anyone's dog, but not directly. Here, that's what we're saying. You understand? If the animal is muksa, you know which animal? The only animal that's not muksa is an animal that you designated to eat. Remember that. Okay. And Taka, your pets are muksa. Your pets are muksa. Even on Shabbos. So that's the whole din of Shulchan Aruch, that you can take them on a walk, even with the leash. But what you cannot do is you cannot lift them up. Halacha yudches. That's why many people hesitate to have pets, because it's common. You pick them up, you move them around. There's a problem on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Now, halacha yudches. Final halacha of this chapter is hamachnis offer man of Yom Tov. You gathered earth. Earth we said is muktzah. So if I brought earth into my house, my friends, and I put it down as a floor, you know what it is? It's floor, it's muktzah. I can walk on it, but I can't take it. But as long as it's clear, it's not another layer to my flooring. No, we said this in Al Shabbos, people would put earth in their house on the side, so if someone throws up, if there's some lichluch, you can cover it. That's good, that's not muktzah. No, that's not part of the floor. It's called muchan. But if it only got burnt on Yom Tiv, so I guess if it's still very hot and it's at least good enough to fry an egg, it's still considered fire. How beautiful. Why? Because it's noilad, which is also on Yom Tiv. A person had an iron shaft implanted in the ground. Now, guys, if I have an iron shaft implanted in the ground, Yakir, I lechatchila should not remove it. This whole halacha is if someone did remove it, the issue is not about the iron shaft. The issue is offer came up with it. So if that offer was toicheyach, it's powderly. For example, dam shchita. But if it came up as a gush offer, then there's an isur of tchina, and therefore lo yichtoish oisa b'yamtiv. Beautiful. Moving on to today's third chapter, Perek Shlishi of Hilchas Shvisas Asar is going to focus on hachana of food on Yom Tov. So we already introduced in the first chapter the big, aside of the lesser type of punishment for Yom Tov, but also the big heter of ach asher yei ochel, right? Oichel nefesh is muter. Let's learn a lot about hachana for oichel. Taka, sometimes it's too far back, where it wouldn't have made a difference whether you did this on Yom Tov or prior, that you cannot do it. And then the step forward that you could do it on Yom Tov. even if it's only machshir oichel nefesh, as we'll see in this chapter. This chapter has 17 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Halacha aleph. Mish oiloi offer mucha. You had ash, earth that was prepared, or ash that was prepared. We're going back to the final. We ended up in Pedek Sheni about that when you shecht a behema, you don't have to cover the blood with earth. You don't. In a shlachtos today, the animals will be blood flowing. But the Torah says that both by a chaya and by a oif, there's a mitzvah to cover it, and let's deal with that. Now, if you don't have offer that's prepared, we also spoke about there's the issue of tchina midoiraisa. Then there's the issue of the rabbanan. Muktzah wasn't designated. But if the earth was designated, and now that you have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of kisoy dam be'afar, even a chayiv oif, but the im ein layafer muchan, or efaro, because you don't only have to cover it dafka with offer. Whatever is needed, if you don't have it, so then you know what we say? We don't say shecht it now and cover it matzah yamtiv. Lechatchila we say don't shecht. Then now another nuance, a very interesting thing. There's a beria that's a suffix chayim behema. In halacha, what is that? There's two things. Either a crossbreed, guys, remember goat and a deer. I'm saying goat and a deer because the goat is a behema, does not need kisui. The deer does. You have to know the father or the mother. Then there's another type of suffix, which is called the koi or kvi. It's a certain type of animal that is a suffix. So you can't shecht it on Yom Tov. And if you shechted it, and that's afilu haylo yofer mucha noyef. Why? Shema yomer araya chayev adoisi. Guys, aside of this din of kisui dam ba'afar, in which ironically chayev oif obligated, behema not obligated. There's the opposite. That chaylev of a behema is asur b'kares, worse than chazan. Chaylev chaya is mutar lachatchila to eat. So hold on. Everyone knows that even earth that was muchan, even earth that's muchan, you can only carry it l'tzoyra. When I shecht a koi, a kvi, the crossbreed during the week, and I cover it, no one is going to think that I'm deciding that it's a chayim. No one will think that. Because I have a suffix. But since on Yom Tov, you can only carry offer, even offer that's not muksa, only l'tzoyra. If I'm going to shecht this on Yom Tov, even though I had offer that's not, and I'm going to cover it, people are going to say, aha, they're covering it on Yom Tov. If there would be a suffix, whether it's a chaya or a behema, they wouldn't cover it. People would say that. So why are they covering it? Because it's a chaya. And therefore, they're going to eat the chaylev. It's a vade chaya. And that's why they covered it the Yom Tov. The Yom Tov. Halacha beis. Chen ha-shoichet chaya b'oif erev Yom Tov. Shechted before Yom Tov. And you didn't cover the blood, which you should have. You know what the din is? Why? Anything that you should have done this before. Together, now there's a mixture of blood and a sort of damim. It's mamish like we learned by the koi, you see, because you can only carry the offer for that which you're chayiv to carry. There's some of it you're not chayiv. It's amazing. We don't say cover it for the chelik that you're chayiv. We say don't wait until the night. But only if you with one shovelful you cover it. You're not doing extra. Then it's so then it's common that because of the 5 halachas of shchita, right, including you don't want the knife to be nicked. So in the makem ashchita gufa, maybe there's a little pebble misubach in the hair. So every time they separate it, you can even rip it out with your hands. Now geziza is a malacha. He's saying that they're doing it biyad, which is a shinoi, which if anything is midrabanan, is allowed, which will allow you the shchita, but then don't remove the hair. But by a bird, it's worse. You can't pull out a feather. You know why? Because that's not called a shini. That's the way they did it. And that knows, doing the rule is, guys, any malacha that's done b'shinoi, you take it down a notch. You take it down a notch. So if you can take it down a notch, then because of tzorech reichel nefesh, you can do it. But when it comes to doing something that's kedarkoi, like taking out a feather, you may not do on Yom Tov. Halacha daled. And by the way, that means that if the only way you can confidently shech this chicken is by removing a feather, which you may not do, don't shech it. It's like we learned at the beginning of this chapter. We don't say that you don't have offer, you don't have meat. Don't, if you didn't designate offer koidem lechatchila, don't shech the animal. Halacha dal. What about skinning hides? So he says you can skin it, but you know what you may not do? You cannot begin the process making it into leather. That's not oichel nefesh, and that's mamash one of the malachas. Lo yim lo chenu, because that's called ibud. Ibud is, the malacha of leather making. The nimso oisem malacha, which is lo yoserach achila. Now hold on, there's going to be a hefsid, because if you don't begin the process, it can get ruined. So you can find ways of not losing the money. We already learned that even in Hilchos Shabbos, you can't make money on Shabbos. You can do things to prevent money loss. In order for many people, when they walk there to trample on it, and that will make sure that it won't get lost. There's another din of Shulchan Aruch that you can place these hides in a cool place, in the shade. We don't say muksa. No, you can move it in order for it not to get ruined. Because leather is very expensive. If I know that if I shech the animal, I won't be able to salvage the hide, I'm going to be afraid to shech. And then Yemana Misim Chasyantiv, Kadesh Limana Melishche. Another din. Another heter. You can't salt it. But you know what you're going to do? When you're salting the meat to roast, salt it on top of the hide. So some of the salt will fall over. Salt a piece over here, then salt a piece over here, salt a piece over here. You're going to end up salting the whole thing. That you can make this type of harama. That's only when you salt for roasting. Why? Because so it's not that much. No, it shouldn't be mamish a lot of salt. But if you are salting it liquidator, now guys, we're going to learn this a lot. When you salt, like nowadays, liquidator, you have to really salt it. Then too much salt is going to fall on the hide. That already is leather preparing. You cannot salt the fats. You cannot turn over the fats. You cannot spread them out. You have to figure out what to do, taka not to lose it. Now, on one hand, we say, if you're going to lose that part of the animal, you're not going to shecht it. So we try to deal with that, but there's a limit. Halacha vav. If a person will skin an animal, so there was a certain technique called roigel. Remember? Regoil. What was that technique? That you begin by one of the legs and the whole hide remains intact. That's called tircha yeseda. That's not needed. Lo yargel b'yamtiv. Ketzru amargel. Zeh sheyoytzi kol habasim min regel achas. Kedei sheyetzi kol ha'or shalom v'lo yikorei. And why can't you do it? Tircha yeseda. Risha terech behefshed zeh toidach gadol. And it's not needed l'moyed. Also, lastly, is base yad b'basar. You cannot cut handles into the meat if you do it kedarkoi, right? The isra is only if you're using a knife. These are called either uvda d'choil or tircha yeseda. You're going to have the food anyways. That's okay. Similar basar to make sure that you know which piece is which piece. Halacha, or that's kosher, not treif, etc. Halacha zay. Molgen esaroish, you are allowed to pour hot water over the head, over the feet. They would also singe the hairs with fire. That's something that is permitted. All of this, my friends, is called soirech oichel nefesh. That's the way you prepared food. But what can you not do? But you cannot remove the hair. Aval ein toiflin oisan bacharsis with a shard or with clay. That's already uvda d'choil. Nor can you cut it with scissors. In other words, you have to do it in an unusual weekday. This whole sugi of uvda d'choil is always difficult. But that's here and one application. The cheid ein goizes in a sayorik with this poitish like preparing vegetables in a decorative fashion. With eukalim, not needed. But if you're not doing it for decoration, you're doing it to remove the koitzim, like a kinreis, artichokes, the akaviyois, hardun. I have no idea what they are. That can be done because there it's not about beauty. It's about functionality. You are allowed to need a large dough on Yom Tov. What's the chiddush? Even though you're not going to eat all of it. But as we learned in the previous chapter or 2 chapters ago, that anything that's made ultimately to be baked, since when you bake one loaf in the oven, that one loaf will taste better if the oven is filled with other loaves. So all of these doughs are needed for the one bread that you're going to eat, for it to be even better. If you need a dough from Erev Yontif, that means you could have been mafresh challah, but you didn't. Too late. But if you lasha b'yontif, which you are allowed to do because it's fresher, so if you are allowed to do the act of lisha on yontif, which you are allowed, you had no breda prior to. So then mafresh memeno challah v'neisin l'koyin. What happens if the isa is tameya? Oishenit masachallah. And now, my friends, what's the pshat? It's not oichel nefesh even for the koyin. Lo yavashel asachallah. Lo yavashel means don't bake the challah. And Mizurah Sefer Emes. You can't even burn it on Yontif because she ain't start from Kachim didn't be Yontif. So the question is, why did we say Esa Doicha Loisase? So the Rambam says because Yontif is both an Esa and a Loisase. And burning Kachim, which includes today when you burn Midrabanan, the whole Chalas Midrabanan, it's a say, ain't Esa Doicha. Is both an asay and a loisase. The ein asay doiche is loisase va'asay. Beautiful. Halacha 9. So what should you do? Well, yanichena ad erev. Wait until the night and burn it. What happens if it's Yom Tov Shel Pesach? They would make bread. They would make matzah on Yom Tov, on Pesach. So then, if you're going to leave it tachmitz, and you're not, you can have a dough that's tummy. A person doesn't have money. That's the dough that they have. So the eitz is gavaldik, and that's a din in Hilchas Challah, that even though we learned this in Mishnayos, in the sugyas, that even though, of course, you should designate challah when you make it into a dough, but if a person forgot to do so, they could designate it after it was baked. They have to gather it in a basket. So here, lachatchila, you separate it after, once it was baked already, it's not going to become chametz. Then at night burn it. And by the way, when you make matzah today, you always do it, because today we're with the 18 minutes, so they make the matzah. They gather everything from this batch in a basket, and they're mafresh challah today as matzah. Lo yafresh as a challah batzik, because it might be, because then you can't burn it. If you can't burn it, God forbid, it's going to become into chametz. Elo yoifes kol isa tameya, and then you're mafresh challah lachem. Beautiful. Halacha yud ein oifem bepurnei chadasham. You may not bake in a new earthenware oven. Why not? Because it might crack. And who cares? Yeah, because then the bread is going to get ruined. And then you're not going to have some chasyantiv. So we selling it's an animal that fell off a roof, and you're going to have to make a bedika afterwards that I'm on paskins, you can shecht it on yontiv because maybe it's going to be kosher. Here the vort is not because if it's going to crack, the bread won't be edible. Maybe it wouldn't crack. The problem is that you push it like eitz otoiva, you won't have simchas yontiv. Ein guard from Tana v'Kanaim, you cannot rake out the Tana v'Kanaim. Cannot rake it out. But you could press it down. The adarab. It's like a new car for the first 3,000 miles. You're in big trouble. No. You can break. Now, 1 second. Here we're speaking. You have to get like this. If I have an oven that has fire in it that I cannot bake without removing it, I can remove it. The first part of Allah Yud is that it's making it difficult for me. That's not enough. But the only if I raked it out, well, then it's straight nefesh. Then mutter. Another thing, the soisman tanur, I am allowed to cover the tanur. This will make the food baked better, right? Because it's going to keep all the air out. I am allowed to use tid for nefesh shebesvivas or mud, other sediments that's around the lake could be used. Why? Because it's not muksa. In other words, that's the word. I went around the river Yakir and I made it soft. It's not just verbal hazmana. I made it soft. That means it's not muksa, and I can put it on. Aval gabel tid b'chlal to make maran yontiv is normally asur. Gewaldig. That's a rule. So you cannot make maran yontiv. It's not something that you could have done it before. You can use what's there if it's not muksa. Now the final halacha is that I am allowed to add water into ashes. I'm doing this to mix. So there's a halachic concept that there's no gibel by aphid, by ashes. So again, the guy has an oven. Today we closed the door. They didn't have doors. They want to cover it with some type of mud. So if the mud is not muksa, they can use it. To add to the mud, you can't. But mutal gabel is aphid. And velistem piatanur, because of the klal, it's called the ein gibel be'aphid. That's the Gemara. That's the sugya. Halacha yudalef. Let's go weiter. This is a great chazara. Tana v'kirayim chadosh. You have a new tana and a new kirayim. Ein sachin esu b'shama b'yom tov. You may not smear it with oil. Why not? Yakir, remember? Asur l'sakin keli b'yom tov. You would do it for tikkun keli. But ve'ein, either shatin or tashin, different girsois. Oisam b'matlis. You may not rub it with a cloth. It's also tikkun keli. Ve'ein mafigin oisam b'tzoinen kedei lachasman. You may not apply cold water to seal it. Tikkun keli. But if you want to do any of the above, Yakir, to make it functional, and you need to be functional in order for you to bake, you may not heat stones to fry on it or to bake on it. Why? Because the heating of the stones will seal the stones. Now you are allowed to heat or bake in a earthenware oven. You can warm up water in a cauldron. You remember, Yakir, what was the issue? I forgot. I looked up yesterday. Why? What's the issues like this? Is that these large water cauldrons? You know that some of this water will remain for after Yom Tov. Doesn't matter. That's what you have. You're like you shecht an animal for one kazayas. The rest will be for tomorrow. I'm warming up water. The keli is so big that it's going to last me the whole week. It's not a problem. Let's go back to Allah Yud Beis. You may not curdle cheese on Yom Tov. May not make cheese on Yom Tov. Why oichel nefesh? Because cheese, my friends, you could have done before. It's not going to be fresher. In contrast, you can crush herbs. You know why? Because if you would have crushed them from Erev Yantiv, Yaful Taman, they would lose some of their taste. Aval melach, but salt, sometimes salt has to be ground. Why? Because salt would not change. You could have done it before. Now you can do it with so you can tilt the pestle, or you can crush it with a plate. Make a shinoi. That's the rule, guys. Making a shinoi is the big solution. And why can't you do it lachatchila? Because if you would have done it, what you should have done, salt does not change. Another thing, you may not grind pepper in a pepper mill. You know why? You can crush these pilpulin in a normal pestle. That's not called uvda dechol. Halacha yud gimel ein koitchen esarifes b'machtashes gedolu. You may not crush groats in a large grinder. You can only crush it in a small grinder. By the way, it says in Shulchan Aruch that nowadays we lost the tradition of what's considered large, what's considered small. So you may never crush it. Shezehu hashinui shalot. Then, and in Eretz Yisrael, even b'ktana also. Question is why oichel nefesh? I'll tell you why. Because crushing groats to make hot cereal, if you would have crushed it yesterday, it would have tasted just as good today. Shatfua shalahem toivi. The im koitchen oisam erev yomtiv ein mekach hefsid. The shatfua shalahem toivi goes on Eretz Yisrael by even bektana asur. Okay, halacha yudala. Now let's go to flour. Moving on. Flour. It's amazing. Lenny came back. All food items. Here you go. Kemach flour. Even though you sifted it on Erev Yantiv and you already moved all the bran, which is what you had to do. So, if a pebble fell in on Yantiv Yakir, if a sliver of wood fell in, then you can do it again. If not, you can't do it again. Now, people would like to do it more than once. Remember, by Benochas, I think they did it 13 times. You did it once, you can't do it. Now, imshina, mutter. What's a shina? She'iraket machoyre hanafa. She'iraket al-gabe yashuf. No, guys, there's two things. You already did it once before. You want to make it even finer? Bishino, you can do it. Halacha tezvav. Moilalin melilis. You may remove the grain from husks. I want you to know people will do it, push it as a nash. You can do it. Bishino. Umefarchen kitnis beyantiv. You can remove legumes from their pods. You're removing oichel from the psoilis. We don't say you could have done it from before. You can do it on yantiv. And you have to get rid of the clipper, right? So you can use both of your hands, Yakir. You're going like this. You're waving with all your koyach with both of your hands to remove the clipper. That's okay. Why is it okay? All of this is unusual. And more, even if you're using a tray or a pot, yod al yod, if I understand, yod al yod means you're using your hands. And you can use a keli, but you cannot use a sifter, you cannot use a kvara to get rid of, in other words, you cannot do it in the usual way. You know how they would do it? They would put it in a tamchoy. It's not a tamchoy means a plate with drawers. Yakir, I would put something in a plate. I would tilt the plate. You know what would happen when you tilt the plate? The heavier parts roll down. The lighter, the klipa stays above. These are unusual ways of separating, which is muted, but don't use a normal nafa tabla b'kavara. Now, there's another thing. B'chlal, by Boyded, by Shabbos, remember the rule of ayal, oichel from psoilis, yud is yad, and lamed la'alter. Here we're saying that when I'm using the ka'ara, but what the problem is that I'm separating the psoilis from the oichel. When am I allowed to remove, even with the shinui, but the psoilis from the oichel? Only when it's easier, because there's more oichel than the psoilis, and oichel nefesh, so I can spend less time. So it's actually going to be easier to do what you do on Shabbos. So then, yes, but the Rambam writes it's not just about quantity, it's about ease. What happens for whatever reason? Even when the oichel is meruba. So then do what is going to be. No, 1 second. Even when the oichel is meruba, yeah. Then you can do the harder. Do what's easier. That's the word on Yontif. And the final halach of this chapter: do not filter mustard using the filter designated for that purpose. Why? Because it looks like boided, even though it's not really boided. Now, let me tell you something, a big rule. When you sift mustard, you have to know, Yakir, both parts are usable. Both parts are usable. And I know we spoke out on Shabbos that if for you it's not, you don't want this, then it's kiboided. That's the issue. So don't do it. But you know what you can do? You can put an egg in this masnenes. When you put a raw egg, you have to know how to do these things. The raw egg will force the mustard go down by itself. It's going to be refined naturally. That's allowed. Another case, what happens if you already have a filter hanging over a container, then you can put wine in it. Then you can put wine in it on Yontif. What are you doing with the filter? You're getting rid of the shmadamlach. But don't hang it. Why? Because hanging the filter is uvda the chol. But for uvda the chol, you can be marim. I want to hang the filter to be mashamar diyah. You know what I can do? I can say, I'm hanging up the filter because in the filter I'm going to put pomegranates. And then I'm going to filter it. But the Rambam says you have to actually put rimonim. You have to actually put rimonim. And then you put l'toich hashamarim, so the wine will filter through. To be continued.